I wasn't trying to listen. At my age, you learn that privacy matters. People deserve their conversations without someone standing in the hallway catching every word. But sometimes life places you in the wrong place at the wrong moment, and suddenly you hear something you were never meant to hear. That evening had started like any other. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock in the living room. I had just finished washing the dinner dishes when I realized I had left my reading glasses in the hallway near the stairs. It was a small thing, the kind of forgetful moment my son Daniel had started pointing out more often lately. "You left your glasses again, Mom. You forgot where you put the keys. Are you sure you're remembering things clearly?" At first, I laughed it off. Everyone forgets small things. But lately, the way he said those words had begun to bother me. I dried my hands on the kitchen towel and walked slowly toward the hallway. The house was dim except for the lamp in the study, where Daniel had been working most of the afternoon. He had come over earlier that day with a stack of papers. "Just some things to organize," he told me. "Nothing you need to worry about." I believed him. He was my son. I reached the corner of the hallway just as his voice drifted through the half-open study door. At first, I wasn't paying attention. I was simply looking for my glasses. But then I heard him say something that made my feet stop moving. "She won't remember signing it." The words were quiet, almost casual, like someone discussing something small, but they landed in my chest like a stone. I stood perfectly still. Daniel continued speaking on the phone. No, it's fine," he said. "Her memory's not what it used to be." My fingers tightened against the hallway wall. Memory. That word again. He had been saying it more and more these past few months. "You forget things now. You shouldn't worry about the paperwork. I'll take care of everything." At the time, I thought he was just trying to help. But now, standing there in the hallway, listening to the quiet murmur of his voice through the study door, something felt terribly wrong. Daniel laughed softly. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." Then he repeated the sentence that made my heart begin to pound. "She won't remember signing it anyway." Signing what? The question echoed loudly in my mind. I hadn't signed anything recently. At least, I didn't think I had. The study chair creaked as Daniel shifted. "I just need to get the final approval," he continued. "After that, everything will be taken care of." Taken care of. The same words he always used. I slowly reached down and picked up my glasses from the small hallway table, but I didn't move, because suddenly a terrible thought was forming in my mind. What if Daniel wasn't just helping me organize things? What if he was arranging something else entirely? And what frightened me most was the possibility that he believed I would never remember. I stood there in the hallway longer than I should have. My glasses rested quietly in my hand, but I didn't put them on. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe very loudly, afraid the sound might travel through the half-open door. Inside the study, Daniel continued speaking on the phone. "Yes, I understand," he said. "The sooner it's done, the easier it'll be." Easier for who? The question formed instantly in my mind. I leaned slightly closer to the wall, just enough to hear the rest of his conversation. No, she hasn't noticed anything, Daniel continued. She trusts me. The words stung more than I expected. Trust. Of course I trusted him. He was my son, the boy I had held when he first learned to walk, the one who used to fall asleep on the couch with his homework still open on his lap. But something in his voice felt different now. Careful, calculated, the kind of tone people use when they're explaining a plan. Exactly, he said into the phone. She thinks it's just routine paperwork. Routine paperwork. My chest tightened. Earlier that afternoon, Daniel had asked me to sign a few documents at the kitchen table. Just some insurance updates, he said. Nothing complicated. I hadn't read them carefully. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't think I needed to. I trusted him. Inside the study, Daniel sighed. Yes, yes, I already have the signature, he said. My heart skipped. Signature. What about the rest? The person on the phone must have asked, because Daniel replied immediately, I'll handle that. The chair creaked again as he leaned back. Once everything's finalized, it'll be done. Finalized. Done. The words echoed strangely in the quiet hallway. Done with what? Suddenly, Daniel laughed softly. You're worrying too much, he said. Then came the sentence that made my stomach turn. She won't remember signing it anyway. There it was again. The same sentence. The same quiet certainty. He truly believed it. That I wouldn't remember. That my mind had begun slipping away. But he was wrong. I remembered everything. The papers on the kitchen table. The way he had placed them neatly in front of me. The way he pointed to the signature line with his finger. And now, standing here in the hallway, I began to wonder something that made my hands tremble. What exactly had I signed? Inside the study, Daniel stood up. His footsteps moved toward the door. I quickly stepped away from the hallway corner and walked slowly toward the living room, pretending I had just come from the kitchen. The study door opened behind me. Mom, Daniel called. I turned calmly. Yes, he looked at me carefully. For a moment, his eyes searched my face. You didn't hear anything, did you? He asked. I smiled gently. No, dear, I said. But inside my chest, a quiet certainty was growing because I had heard enough to know something was very wrong. Daniel watched me for a moment longer before relaxing his shoulders. Good, he said with a small smile. I was just finishing a call. I nodded as if nothing had happened. Did you find your glasses? He asked. Yes, I replied calmly, holding them up for him to see. Ah, there they are, he said. He walked past me toward the kitchen, the same confident stride he had always had since he was young. I followed slowly behind him, trying to keep my breathing steady. The kitchen looked exactly as it had earlier that afternoon. The sink was clean. The window above it let in the soft orange glow of the setting sun. And right there on the table were the papers. Daniel had left them in a neat stack beside his coffee mug. My heart beat a little faster when I saw them. Those were the same papers he had asked me to sign earlier. Insurance updates, he had called them. Just routine things. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. After all, Daniel handled most of those things these days. Ever since my husband passed away, he had stepped in to help with bills, taxes, and forms that seemed to grow more complicated every year. You shouldn't worry about paperwork, he always told me. That's what I'm here for. And until tonight, I had believed him. Daniel picked up his mug and took a sip of coffee. I'll finish organizing these tomorrow, he said casually, tapping the stack of papers with his finger. All right, I replied softly, but my eyes stayed fixed on the documents. The signature page was still visible, my name written across the bottom, Margaret Ellis. But now that I looked at it again, something felt different. Earlier, when I signed it, Daniel had covered most of the page with his hand, pointing only to the line where my name belonged. Just sign here, Mom. I had trusted him. Now, remembering the phone call I had overheard only minutes ago, trust suddenly felt like a dangerous thing. What exactly are those for again? I asked gently. Daniel glanced up. Oh, just updating some accounts. Accounts? Nothing important, he said quickly. His answer came a little too quickly. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. But inside, my mind was racing, because the words I had overheard in the hallway kept echoing in my head. She won't remember signing it. I waited until Daniel stepped out onto the back porch to answer another call. The moment the door closed behind him, I walked quietly to the kitchen table. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the stack of papers. The top page looked harmless enough, some sort of legal document, but when I turned the second page, my breath caught in my throat, because suddenly the word at the top of the page made everything clear. Property transfer agreement. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. And there it was again. My signature, the one Daniel had asked for earlier that afternoon. The one he believed I would never remember. But now that I saw the truth, I realized something that made my heart pound. Daniel hadn't just asked me to sign routine paperwork. He had asked me to sign away my house. For a moment, the paper blurred in my hands. Property transfer agreement. The words sat at the top of the page, like a quiet confession. I blinked slowly and leaned closer to the document, as if the letters might change if I looked at them long enough. But they didn't. They remained exactly the same. My house, my home, the place where my husband and I had lived for 37 years. The place where Daniel had taken his first steps in the hallway and learned to ride his bicycle in the driveway. According to this paper, it no longer belonged to me. My signature rested neatly at the bottom of the page. Margaret Ellis. The same loose handwriting I had used my entire life. But now it felt like someone else's name, because I had never knowingly signed anything like this. I turned the page carefully, my fingers trembling slightly. The next document made my stomach tighten. Authorization of property transfer. Beneath it was another line, another signature, mine. But there was something else this time, another name printed beside it. Daniel Ellis, authorized representative. The word felt strange. When had Daniel become my representative? I had never agreed to that. The back door creaked slightly as the wind moved it. I froze. Daniel was still outside, speaking quietly on the phone. His voice carried faintly through the glass. I had only a few moments. My eyes moved quickly across the pages. There were several documents in the stack, all legal, all carefully arranged, all signed. My name appeared again and again at the bottom of each page. And suddenly, the memory came back. Earlier that afternoon, Daniel sitting across from me at the kitchen table, a warm smile on his face. "These are just updates," he had said, "routine paperwork." I had signed where he pointed, without reading, without questioning, because I trusted him, because he was my son. Outside, Daniel laughed softly at something the person on the phone had said. The sound sent a cold feeling through my chest, because now I understood what he meant when he said those words earlier. She won't remember signing it. He believed I would forget. He believed my memory had already begun fading. But he was wrong. I remembered the entire afternoon. I remembered every paper, every smile, every word. And now, holding these documents in my hands, I realized something far more frightening. Daniel hadn't just been planning something. He had already done it. The only question left was, what exactly had he taken from me? My hands trembled as I turned the next page. At the top of the document, written in bold letters, were words that made my chest tighten. Sale authorization agreement. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Sale, authorization, agreement. Words that sounded harmless on their own, but together, they carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. I leaned closer to the table and read the first line slowly. The undersigned authorizes the transfer and sale of the property located at the address that followed was unmistakable. My address, the house I was standing in. My heart began beating louder in my ears. This wasn't just paperwork. It was permission. Permission to sell my home. And at the bottom of the page, my name was written again. Margaret Ellis. The same familiar signature. But now it looked different. Because now I knew what it meant. Outside the back door, Daniel was still speaking on the phone. His voice floated faintly through the glass. "Yes," he said quietly. "Everything's signed." I froze. The paper crinkled softly in my hands. "Once the buyer confirms," Daniel continued, "we can move forward." Buyer. The word struck me like a sudden gust of wind. There was already a buyer. I swallowed slowly and turned another page. This document was shorter, just a single paragraph. But the sentence at the bottom made my stomach drop. Closing date scheduled within 14 days of agreement. 14 days. 2 weeks. That was all the time left before this house, my house, would legally belong to someone else. And I had unknowingly given permission. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I placed the papers back exactly where I had found them, aligning the corners carefully so Daniel wouldn't notice they had been touched. My mind was racing. How had this happened? When had Daniel started planning something like this? And most importantly, why? Outside, the back door opened. I quickly stepped away from the table just as Daniel walked back inside. He slipped his phone into his pocket and glanced at me. "You all right, Mom?" he asked. "Yes," I replied calmly. He walked to the refrigerator and poured himself a glass of water. "I'll head out soon," he said casually. You should get some rest. I nodded, but my heart was still pounding, because now I knew the truth. Daniel believed I had signed those papers without understanding them. He believed I wouldn't remember. He believed the house would quietly disappear before I ever noticed. But standing there in my own kitchen, I realized something he hadn't expected. I remembered everything, and now that I knew what he was planning, I had to decide what I was going to do next. Daniel finished his water and set the glass down on the counter. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like someone who believed everything had gone exactly as planned. Did you find your glasses earlier? He asked casually. Yes, I replied. Good. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I'll come by tomorrow, he said. There are still a few things we need to finish. Finish. The word made my chest tighten, but I kept my face calm. What things? I asked gently. Daniel hesitated for a moment. Just more paperwork, he said quickly. More paperwork. I nodded slowly, pretending the answer satisfied me. But inside, my mind was turning faster than it had in years, because I knew exactly what those papers were about now. He had already arranged the sale. He had already found a buyer, and he believed the hardest part was over. All he needed was time. Time for the closing date. Time for the house to change hands quietly. Time for me to forget what I had signed. Daniel smiled as he headed toward the front door. Try not to worry about anything, he said. I've got it all handled. Handled. That was always his favorite word. I walked him to the door the same way I always had, but tonight felt different because now every small detail mattered. The way he glanced around the house, the way he checked the hallway table where the mail sat, the way his eyes lingered on the walls for a moment longer than usual, almost like someone looking at a place they were about to leave behind. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. I'll see you tomorrow, Mom. All right, I said. He started down the steps. Then he turned back suddenly. Oh, he added casually, don't worry about those papers on the table. I'll take them with me next time. My heart skipped, but I smiled gently. Of course. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Then he walked down the driveway, climbed into his car, and drove away. I stood on the porch until the red glow of his taillights disappeared at the end of the street. Only then did I go back inside. The house felt different now, not unsafe, but fragile, because suddenly I understood something important. Daniel believed I didn't know what he had done. He believed the documents were safe. He believed I would never question him. But standing there in my kitchen, I realized something he had completely underestimated. I still had 2 weeks, and 2 weeks was more than enough time to stop him. That night, I didn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words from the paper again. Sale authorization agreement. 2 weeks, 14 days, until the house I had lived in for nearly 4 decades could belong to someone else. And Daniel believed I would simply forget. Around midnight, I got out of bed and walked slowly to the kitchen. The papers were still on the table, exactly where Daniel had left them. I turned on the small lamp above the sink and sat down quietly, studying each page again. Everything was carefully written, official, legal, but something kept bothering me. Daniel had pointed exactly where I should sign earlier that afternoon, covering most of the pages with his hand. Just sign here, Mom. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it, but now I read every line carefully, and suddenly I noticed something important. The document said the property owner authorizes the sale, not that the property owner must sell. Authorizes. The difference was small, but it mattered because authorization can sometimes be withdrawn. My heart beat a little faster as I picked up the phone from the kitchen wall. There was only one person who might understand these papers better than I did. Mr. Caldwell. He had been our family lawyer for years, ever since my husband bought this house. I hadn't spoken to him in a long time, but I still remembered the number. The phone rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell, it's Margaret Ellis." There was a pause. "Margaret," he said with surprise. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," I admitted quietly. I explained everything slowly. The papers, the signatures, the conversation I had overheard. The silence on the other end of the phone grew heavier with every sentence. When I finished, Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Margaret," he said carefully, "did you knowingly agree to sell your house?" "No." "And were you clearly told that those documents were for a property sale?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "Then this situation may not be legal." The words sent a strange mix of relief and sadness through my chest. "Your son may have misrepresented the documents," he continued. "If that's the case, the authorization can absolutely be challenged." Challenged. The word felt powerful. "But the buyer," I said softly. "Buyers can only purchase property if the owner fully consents," Mr. Caldwell replied. "And from what you're telling me, you did not." I stared at the stack of papers on the table. For the first time since overhearing Daniel's phone call, something inside me began to settle. "Margaret," Mr. Caldwell added gently, "I think you should bring those documents to my office tomorrow morning." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will." When I hung up the phone, the house felt different again, not fragile anymore, steady, because Daniel had believed something that wasn't true. He believed I was powerless. But now, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen, I realized something he had never expected. I had just taken the first step to stop him. The next morning felt strangely calm. The sky was pale and clear when I left the house, the same way it had looked the day my husband and I first moved here. I placed the stack of documents carefully into my handbag and drove slowly across town toward Mr. Caldwell's office. Every street along the way held a memory. Daniel riding his bike beside my car when he was 10. My husband waving from the porch after finishing work in the garden. This house wasn't just a building. It was our life. And now I had to protect it. Mr. Caldwell's office sat in the same brick building it had occupied for nearly 20 years. When I stepped inside, the receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellis." "Good morning." She led me down the hallway to Mr. Caldwell's office. He stood up when I entered, looking older than I remembered, but just as kind. "Margaret," he said gently, "come sit down." I handed him the folder without speaking. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the document slowly. The room was quiet, except for the faint rustling of paper. Every few moments he would pause, frown slightly, and turn another page. Finally, after several minutes, he set the papers down on the desk. "Well," he said. I held my breath. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" I asked. He tapped one of the pages with his finger. "Your son had you sign a property sale authorization without clearly explaining its purpose." "I thought they were insurance updates," I said softly. Mr. Caldwell nodded. "And that misunderstanding changes everything." My heart beat faster. "How?" "Because for a contract like this to be valid," he explained carefully, "the owner must fully understand what they are agreeing to." He leaned back in his chair. "If you were misled about the nature of the document, that authorization can be revoked." Revoked. The word felt like a door opening. "So the house isn't gone yet?" I asked quietly. "No," he said firmly. A wave of relief moved through me. But Mr. Caldwell wasn't finished. "There's another issue," he added. "What issue?" He turned the page toward me and pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "The buyer has not completed closing." "That happens in 2 weeks," I said. "Exactly." He folded his hands together. "Until that happens, the property legally remains yours. Mine. Still mine." Mr. Caldwell picked up his pen and wrote something on a blank sheet of paper. "I'm preparing a formal notice revoking the authorization," he said. My chest loosened slightly for the first time since yesterday evening. "But Margaret," he added carefully, "there is something you should be prepared for." "What?" He looked at me kindly but seriously. "When your son realizes this sale cannot proceed," he paused, "there will be a conversation." I nodded slowly, because deep down, I already knew that conversation was coming. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt quieter than usual. Not the peaceful quiet I had known for years, but the kind of silence that comes before something difficult. I placed my handbag on the kitchen table and slowly sat down in the same chair where Daniel had asked me to sign those papers only yesterday. The stack of documents was gone now. Mr. Caldwell had kept them to prepare the legal notice. Outside the window, the maple tree moved gently in the breeze, the same tree my husband planted the year we moved into this house. For a moment, I simply sat there, remembering. Then my phone rang. Daniel. The name appeared on the screen, glowing softly in the afternoon light. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello." His voice came through immediately. "Mom, where are the papers?" Straight to the point. No greeting, no small talk. "I took them," I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Took them where?" To Mr. Caldwell. The silence that followed was longer this time. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had changed. "You went to a lawyer?" "Yes." Another pause. "You didn't need to do that." "I did." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Mom, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "Complicated." I looked around the kitchen. The same cabinets we had installed 25 years ago. The same table where Daniel had done his homework as a boy. Nothing about this house had ever been complicated. You asked me to sign something without explaining it, I said quietly. I told you what it was, he insisted. No, I replied. You didn't. His breathing grew heavier. You were going to forget about it anyway. The words landed harder than anything he had said before. Forget. That word again. The one he had used to convince himself I wouldn't notice. I remembered, I said softly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something new. Frustration. You're living alone, Mom, he said. You can't stay in that house forever. That house. Not our house. Not your home. Just that house. I've lived here 37 years, I said. And I worry about you. I know. I truly did. Fear can make people believe they are doing the right thing. But fear does not give someone the right to take another person's life choices away. Mr. Caldwell is sending a notice, I continued gently. What notice? The sale authorization has been revoked. The silence on the phone became absolute. Finally, Daniel spoke again. You can't do that. Yes, I said quietly. I can. Because in that moment, Daniel realized something he had never expected. I hadn't forgotten anything. And the house he thought he had already sold still belonged to me. Daniel arrived the next morning. I knew it was him before I even opened the door. His car pulled into the driveway quickly, stopping with a sudden jerk, like someone who had been thinking about a conversation the entire drive. When I opened the door, he stood there on the porch with the same expression he used to wear as a boy, whenever he knew he had done something wrong, but didn't want to admit it yet. Mom, he said. Daniel. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The morning air was cool, and the maple tree in the yard rustled softly above us. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. I talked to Mr. Caldwell, he said quickly. He called me this morning. I nodded. Then you know. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slowly across the living room. You didn't have to do that, he said. We could have handled this ourselves. We tried, I replied gently. He stopped walking. You don't understand, he said. I was doing what was best for you. Best. The word sounded familiar, but something about the way he said it made me sad. Selling my home without telling me isn't what's best for me, I said quietly. Daniel looked around the room. His eyes moved across the walls, the old photographs, the small details that had been part of his life for as long as he could remember. You shouldn't be here alone, he said. I'm not alone, I answered. You're 75, and I still remember everything. The words hung in the air between us. Daniel sighed and sat down at the kitchen table. For the first time since this whole situation began, he looked tired. I thought you were starting to forget things, he admitted. I forget where I put my glasses sometimes, I said with a small smile. That happens to everyone. He rubbed his face slowly. I didn't want to watch something bad happen. I understood that fear. Watching someone you love grow older can make the future feel uncertain. But love cannot replace honesty. You should have talked to me, I said. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. We sat there quietly for a moment. Finally, he looked up. "I'll cancel everything," he said. "Thank you." The house felt peaceful again as sunlight moved across the kitchen floor. After a while, Daniel stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back once more. "I really thought you wouldn't remember," he said softly. I smiled gently. "I remembered everything." He nodded, finally understanding. And when the door closed behind him, the house felt exactly the way it had always felt. Not like a property, not like paperwork, but like a home. Because sometimes the most important thing about growing older isn't proving you're still strong. It's reminding the people around you that your voice still matters. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.